and recognize based on the Father's love all things were possible. When Paul talks about the power of God, we have to read this because this is where I'm really going. Remember in Matthew 16, Jesus says, I must go to Jerusalem. These things must happen. I must. It's one must and a whole bunch of different things. And it ends at the cross. And the enemy is right there. He's right there. You don't have to go to the cross. And Jesus knows it's Satan speaking and turns and rebukes him and says why in the whole thing. But in 1 Corinthians, the first chapter, would you read the 18th verse and then drop down and read 22 through 25?
For the word of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God.
The cross is the power of God. Now stop and think about everything we've been talking about, an outstretched arm and love and the hand and power, and you see the cross. And Paul is saying that's the power of God. And we see a man stripped bare naked, beaten to death, humiliated, shamed, lied about, and everything else hanging up there on a cross, nailed to it. And Paul is saying, behold the power of God. What on earth is he talking about? There is nothing that I see up there that's powerful at all. What is so powerful about that? Yet Paul is looking and saying, that's the power of God. Would you continue on, verses 22 through 25?
For indeed, Jews ask for signs and Greeks search for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, to Jews a stumbling block, and to Gentiles foolishness. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men.
It seems to me that if we hadn't read that when we first came in tonight, if I said, what's the first thing you think of when you think of the power of God? And we're not bad people. We're not naughty little children. I just know the way we think and the way we've been trained to think and the way Israel thought. He's hanging on the cross because he was supposed to wipe out the Romans. He was supposed to kill every one of those little Italians. What is he doing up there on the cross? Come down off of there. If you are the Son of God, come down. What kind of power are we talking about that stays up there? What is that about? If I would have asked you when you first came in, what's the first thing that comes to mind, the power of God? Maybe somebody in here, not me, would have said the cross. And it is the most obvious, most powerful, loving place in all of history. And yet, why are we still talking about the parting of the Red Sea or all these powerful, going to power conferences? Everybody's longing, to see something. And it's almost like the Spirit of God is saying this whole thing would be over in an afternoon if you tapped into the real power of God, into His love, and instead of craving for all these powerful manifestations of what? Of power? That's what men desire. That's what men long for, is to see the power. When Jesus said that you would lay down your life for a friend, for someone else, you would give of yourself, that you would exercise your power in love for God by loving one another. And that love for one another is a costly endeavor. It is not cheap. It's hard. It is not easy. I wish I could sit here tonight and say, this is like Christianity 101. This is beyond PhDs. This is the kind of love that is really hard. The reason why it's so hard is because I have the power to do something else. I can do something else. And Jesus is saying, you will know true power when you give into the other things and become what appears to be powerless, you become powerful. We're going to keep talking in the weeks ahead about this because I really think there's a mindset that once we see it and get it, I'm not trying to turn the Bible upside down or anything. I believe that in terms of the Bible, we've read it too square. We've read it too orderly. We've read it through what somebody has told us. The book of Isaiah, 54 times, when he talks about God, he talks about the Lord of hosts. Dun, 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 the Lord of hosts. The general, the whole thing. I mean, it's huge. I love the brother. But something very odd happens in Isaiah. He hits Isaiah 53. That may mean nothing to some of you. To others, you say, I know chapter 53. That's the suffering servant. That's the Messiah. That's the picture of Jesus on the cross who bore... Yeah, that's all about the cross. Funny thing, after that, no more Lord of hosts. Kind of odd, don't you think? Over 50 times he refers to God as the Lord of hosts. We get through Isaiah 53. He starts chapter 54 with God calling himself the Lord of hosts, your Father. And it's like, Lord of hosts, your daddy, and I won't let you down. I love you. I am going to redeem you with an outstretched arm. I've made bare my holy arm for all to see. No one in this world, if my people will go out and love people, no one will ever question the love of God. I've made bare my holy arm. I've stretched it out and made it bare for all to see. I am not ashamed or embarrassed to be loved and to love under any conditions all the time. Funny thing about Isaiah, about Moses. Moses is on the man of war kick in Exodus 15, where he's, a mighty hand. He's really into it. He's pretty bombastic about it, actually. And then as he meets with God up on the mountain and stuff, Exodus 33:19. This is after Moses has come down. He's broken the commandments because he's so mad because of the idolatry that's taking place, the wrong kind of worship, the wrong kind of adoration.
He said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and will show compassion on whom I will show compassion.
Now I hope you can catch this from kind of like the whole perspective. Moses is on this man of war thing. He breaks the commandments in anger, the stone tablets. Their history now. It's a mess. This is what God says to Moses, who has this war fixation. I'm not hearing man of war, mighty hand, or anything else. I'm hearing a God talking with his son, saying, I know what you perceived at the Red Sea. You were impressed. I get all that. But I want to have a little walk and a little talk with you. And I will have compassion on who I will have. I will have mercy on who I will have mercy. I will be gracious upon whom I will be gracious. I'm a gracious God. Go into chapter 34 and read the first verse.
Now the Lord said to Moses, cut out for yourself 2 stone tablets, like the former ones, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the former tablets you shattered.
I'm going to outstretch my arm, and I'm going to take my hand, and I'm not going to give you spanking with it. I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to write it again. The Father's being revealed to the Son, to Moses. And then what actually happens, would you read verses 5 and 6?
And the Lord descended in the cloud and stood there with him as he called upon the name of the Lord. Then the Lord passed by in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord God, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness and truth.
As my kids grew up, I had to leave them with a certain viewpoint of me because they couldn't, when they were 5 or 6, because they couldn't possibly understand me like they would when they're 15 or 20. But if I leave them with the viewpoint of a 5 or 6-year-old when they're 15 or 20, I'm certainly not doing them any good. They need to understand who their father really is. As you watch the relationship and you hear the kinds of things that God says to Moses, it's like he doesn't want him to forget about the mighty hand. He's going to need to understand the mighty hand. But he's got to somehow get him to understand, but Moses, I'm compassionate, I'm gracious, I'm merciful. I'm not a God of anger. I'm slow to anger. And a God who thinks, who talks about, a day is 1,000 years. I mean, when he says he's slow, a week is like 7,000 years. So for those who would say, well, Pharaoh really got God angry. Really? Because he jerked him around for a few months. Say, no, for 400 years. Okay. Well, that's like a couple hours in the morning. I'm not trying to be, it is kind of funny, but the point I'm trying to make is, could it be that in our thinking, this last week, and there's an interesting thing, you've said 4 times now you're going to end, but I mean it this time. Do you ever notice in the Good Samaritan parable, the lawyer is placed as the half-dead man, the one who's interested in the greatest commandment in the law. He says, who is my neighbor? And Jesus has a half-dead guy by the side of the road. And he said, so who was a neighbor to that guy? Bing! Like, wait a minute. Are you saying that I'm half-dead by the side of the road? No, I'm saying you're half alive. Because the law is not a bad thing. But you have to go beyond the law and get into relationship with your Father through Jesus Christ if you're going to be fully alive.